Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 28th of February 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the video screen at the moment. Pause the video. I guess since this morning, I was pretty angry this morning. I've been pretty despondent walking around the house today with my tail between my legs. Hopefully got over it a little bit now. Just the whole political situation, especially in the United States with people like Mike Johnson, just enrages me. It's just unfair. Things are not fair. Anyway, and the Russians appear to be gaining momentum or gaining the upper hand on the front lines, but it looks like they're 10 years plus of they've had a century of information warfare, but online, internet, troll farm, information space, hybrid warfare. They might not be winning. It's not that the majority of the people in the world are towing the party line with Kremlin propaganda, but a significant proportion of Western societies are taking it hook, line and sinker, and I think their return on investment for that has been insanely good. As I keep saying, Russia should never have invaded Ukraine. They should have just spent all that money on troll farms, and it would have absolutely sent democratic institutions and societies around Europe and the West into a tailspin. Anyway, we'll go to the Frontline update proper. Just to let you know, this is according to JR, who's done the mapping. What a legend. He's got Andrew Perpetua sees there 1.2 square kilometers of Russian gains, and Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, has 3.68 kilometers of Russian losses and 5.11 kilometers of Russian gains. So there is a bit of movement. It's always a question as to whether that is a readjustment of mapping or whether the Ukrainians have pushed back in any particular area. We'll go to this northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatovo to Crimea, and between Kupiansk and Svatovo we have the Avdiivka area where it looks like there are some Ukrainian gains there. My thoughts would be that that's probably a readjustment in all reality. I couldn't find any tweets to go alongside that, but he is bringing it, or Suryat Maps is bringing out those tweets at the moment. So it might be that there's a little bit of delay, or it could be because it's a game for the Ukrainians doesn't feature it too much. That sometimes happens, which is a little bit frustrating. But anyway, more likely a readjustment there in the favour of the Ukrainians around that Avdiivka salient. But it is tough up there. There's aerial bombardments going on. The worry is in Kupiansk here. So how far are we from the front line there? Let's have a little look. So you've got Kupiansk city to, I guess, the front lines is something like 7 kilometers, right? But in terms of the outskirts or maybe other areas of the broader Kupiansk town area, I guess you could say 5.5 kilometers as well. This claim is pretty worrying. Russians hit the center of Kupiansk with anti-tank missiles. A 59-year-old and 39-year-old man were killed. This was reported by the head of Kharkiv RMA, Olenivka. A woman was also injured. Presumably there are still people under the rubble, damaged residential buildings and civil infrastructure. If that is true, I don't know where the Russians are to do that and what they're using, but they seem to be at present, according to pretty much everyone, out of the range of such munitions. However, it could be a DRG, deep reconnaissance group, getting into places to do something like that. That's a bit of a worry. And we'll go to the Institute for the Study of War. This is the only part of the ISW I'm going to read out today because there's an awful lot of extra information on certain areas, as much as I thought there would be. And I don't know if that means that, although it's quite worrisome looking at the map, there is at least maybe a little bit of stability in some of these areas. I don't know. But anyway, the spokesperson for a Ukrainian brigade operating in the Kupiansk direction stated that Russian forces continue to conduct offensive operations towards Kupiansk with an alternating intensity, wherein Russian forces initially attack for a period, then decrease the tempo of their offensive operations after suffering losses to regroup and replenish, and then later intensify assaults once again. ISW has previously assessed that Russian forces likely intend to alternate the intensity of operations along the entire Kupiansk-Svatovo-Kreminna line in a staggered manner in order to allow Russian forces to periodically regroup and prepare for future assaults. That is, I think, testament to how well the Ukrainians are probably doing in defending, given their lack of material and ammunition, that they are giving the Russians a hard time, that they have to keep regrouping and going again. The challenge, of course, is that the Russians can afford to do that with their recruitment mobilization statistics, meaning that they are able to replenish everything that they lose on a monthly basis at the moment. They seem to be losing about 30,000 troops and mobilizing about 30,000 troops. And so that just gives them this continued ability to keep going at it, where the Ukrainians are struggling to maintain those lines in terms of boots on the ground and, of course, ammunition and material. Right, we're going to go to Bakhmut next. And although there are no changes all the way down here, there is a lot of activity going around in Bilorivka, a lot of activity in the Kreminna area in the Serebrentsky forest. So even though I'm not talking about it, doesn't mean it's not happening. Bilorivka, I think, is a real key here. Andrew Perpetua is talking about this on his live stream last night, and it's always been the case that this is stopping the Russians really from moving too far to the north into the forest area here, and then around to Seversk, and stopping them sort of going too far to the south as well. It's just a key little position, larger than these other ones that I talk about often, such as that little village of Nivelska for this area of Avdiivka here. So you got just below Pervomaisky, you got Nivelska, that stops the Russians getting around behind Pervomaisky and around and behind in Krasnohorivka, although it's a real problem there at the moment. And there's also Pobieda that they have taken, that acted as the same kind of key linchpin area that was stopping the Russians from doing larger encirclements of, say, Novomykhailivka, but also Marinka when they were fighting over that. So for the Seversk front, Bilorivka is a very important place to just keep holding the Russians back, and it's topographically a very difficult place for the Russians to take. Anyway, when we come to Bakhmut, although there are no changes there, the Russians really are pushing heavily into Ivanivska. There is a lot of activity going on there, and the Russians are absolutely hammering the town itself. Artillery, drones, all that kind of activity. Mortars are going to be liberally peppering Ivanivska. I think peppering's an understatement. So it is tough there. Chasiv Yar is going to be, fought over at some point soon, unless things change. It doesn't look like things are going to be changing, although the latest news is that the US are now considering the very last of their emergency presidential drawdown authority. So that's about $4 billion worth of kit that will come from the Pentagon, basically, to throw at Ukraine as a kind of emergency measure, because it just doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. It doesn't look like, goodness me, if Mike Johnson was ever set foot in my county in the UK, I would do mind over matter and run to where he is, despite my multiple sclerosis, and I would jump that man. Right, as we keep it calm, Piss. We're going to talk a little bit about Klishchiivka here. So there's some interesting data coming from Andrew Perpetua's live stream, where he talks about this famous trench area, which is, I'm going to give you a little topographical look at this. So if you remember, Klishchiivka, this area is the low ground. There's this railway that loops up around the north of Klishchiivka, then goes up there. And then there's this trench line, or trench network, that sits above Klishchiivka. Now, if we just change the directions of the map here, so that we are looking now back over Klishchiivka, you can see that this high ground here and this trench network on the high ground looks over Klishchiivka. So it is very difficult to maintain control of Klishchiivka if you don't control the heights here. So it's really all about the heights. And if we go and look around the other way, you've got Klishchiivka there in the low ground, and then you have these really quite steep hills for them to take if you're attacking up here. So the key is to attack from the north along the high ground already. It's very difficult to do otherwise, really. So okay, that means that the Russians are clearly going to be attacking from the north to gain control of this area. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they did. Now, Suriyat Maps very early on said that the Russians took control over this trench network. And you can see on this slightly newer, this is where Google Earth has updated some of its satellite imagery. Because if you remember when I was mapping maybe 6 months ago, this was still just one zigzag thing that was very faint. Now we've got a whole network of stuff. I don't know when the imagery is, what year it now is, but anyway, it's sort of piecemeal updating various areas. This is apparently, as I say, according to Suriyat Maps, under control of the Russians, except it isn't. So let's go and pop into Andrew Perpetua's live stream from last night.
And where are the Ukrainians in Klishchiivka? They're actually in the town, but not up on that ridge above the town.
No, they're on this hill.
Oh, okay.
So, these parts of the trench is 100% Ukrainian held. This part of the trench is more or less Ukrainian held, and this part of the trench is kind of unknown. It seems that it's a gray area. I've seen both Russians and Ukrainians in this part of the trench. So
let's just put that onto my map just so you know what we're talking about here. So that is to say, this part of the trench here is definitely Ukrainian. This part is Ukrainian coming along here until you get to this very edge here, which is a bit of a grey zone, right? Which is very different to what Suriyat Maps has been saying for a long time and hasn't adjusted their mapping accordingly.
So it's like this part is unknown, and this is mostly Ukrainian, and all of this is totally Ukrainian. And on the flip side, Ukraine definitely controls this trench, this part of the trench, and this part I have no idea. And this part of the trench, I have no idea.
So again, just to let you know, so Ukraine control all of this, basically south of the road, or the Klishchiivka side of the road, right, that loops here. Ukraine control all of that, apart from maybe that very edge bit there, where it's a bit of a grey zone. And then all of this, Ukraine controls this area, it appears. And then when you start getting closer to this forest area, he's just, I don't know. I'm not sure, don't have the evidence at the moment to know one way or the other.
Yeah, Ukraine controls most of the trench. Probably like 2/3, or maybe 75%.
Which is good news to find that out finally, because it's been a question I've been wondering about for an awful long time.
All the videos we get from here are drone attacks, basically. It's Russia attacking all of the bunkers here. The bunkers here seem pretty good. The way they're constructed is it's like a concrete box with like a meter of earth around it. The drones come in and they try to like blow away the earth. But it's kind of pointless, to be honest. It takes so many drones to blow away a meter of earth. And then under that, there's like a concrete building. And from what I can tell, Ukraine goes in and refills those craters with earth whenever they get a chance to.
So I thought that was worth knowing that.
Klishchiivka.
I thought that, good information. So just to go back to Olenivka, although there are no changes to Olenivka, just to remind you that is north of Klishchiivka, back over here. Suriyat Maps has recently said the situation is deteriorating for the Ukrainian army there, which is beginning to withdraw some of its troops. The Russian army made new advances in the locality during the last hours of fighting is taking place in Tereshkovo Street. It's not true, that this village has been taken. In fact, half of it is still not under control. Not yet. I mean, it's just little hints of language there that tells you exactly what or where Suriyat Maps' sympathies lie, in my opinion. Right. Okay, so we're going to now come out of Bakhmut, pop down to Avdiivka. Just to let you know, in Donetsk, there was another HIMARS strike of a town, Olenivka, I think it is, Olenivka, somewhere around. I haven't located it yet. I haven't actually looked, but it is in occupied Donetsk, and that has been hit by a HIMARS strike at yet again another reward ceremony. So this has happened previously for the Russians. They gather a bunch of troops, have an award ceremony, and news of it gets out, and it gets hammered. Anyway, apparently 30 people have been killed or wounded. I think it's 19 dead, 12 wounded, which is a bit of an issue for the Russians there, and that would no doubt include at least a high-ranking official. Okay, not necessarily, but most probably. Right, now we're going to go to Avdiivka, where we have. Interestingly, actually, Andrew Perpetua was talking on his live stream that the Ukrainians actually do control a bit. If you remember these big slag heaps, tailings, spoilings piles there that the Ukrainians took control of, stuck a flag at the top, and then everyone was thinking that was pretty impressive. Not quite sure what you're planning on doing with that, because you don't have the wherewithal to do a large attack, particularly on Orlivka, the larger city behind it. Nonetheless, they did do some good work there, and then they slowly got pushed back. But Andrew Perpetua saying he's seen some evidence to show that actually Ukrainians have a little bit are further to the east than actually he'd given them credit for. So they still maintain control over stuff that they had taken there, which is, I guess, good news for the Ukrainians there. Right, now Avdiivka proper. As you can see, Surat Maps has quite a number of gains there for the Russians, particularly along this area from... Right, let's get it's so different now that I need to know where the cauldron is. Right, so you've got Vodyany down here, and you've got Stepova up there, which has now been pretty much has now been taken. Everyone agrees with that, but it's worth noting that Stepova, 13 units of destroyed Russian equipment on one image there. So there are some high losses for the Russians. We know it's been a very costly project for them taking Avdiivka. And I was talking to you yesterday about how, if we draw on the map here, the Russians they're obviously around here, right? And they are pushing to the west, but the Ukrainians will be using the river and the bluff sort of behind it as a natural defensive border. And I was saying really that the Russians' best chance is not to do a head-on assault. They will have to cross the river with equipment, even though it's not the biggest river. So they're more likely to come up there, I would have thought, and do something like that. But hey, what do I know? Anyway, just to give you a topographical map of the area, just to give a greater understanding. So here we have Avdiivka, and we have I think that's what do we have? There's going to be Vodyany Opitny, so that's Vodyany Opitny. You've got Stepova up there. You've got Severny there, Tonyenka there, Orlivka there, and these are these settlements, Lastochkerna there, that the Russians are trying to take. And indeed, they've taken Lastochkerna, they've taken Severny, they are in on Tonyenka, Orlivka, they've taken Stepova, and they're in on Berdichi at the moment. But you can see the river coming down here. You've got several rivers that are joining here, and you've got this yellow higher ground behind the river, but it's this river area that you can see that the Ukrainians are going to use that to as a natural defensive line, sit behind it, and the Russians would have to get across that to fight uphill and also get their equipment across the river. So as I say, if they can then come along this railway line here, then they can come down in this area north of Berdichi. So I'd imagine that there will be a lot of Ukrainian defensive work going on around here to stop the Russians doing that. Otherwise, it will be tough ground for them to move that way. And I'm pretty sure I saw an announcement by someone, it wasn't Sersky, but it's someone today talking about how the natural topography of the area will be to the advantage of the Ukrainians. They had admitted that themselves. So I thought I'd had that ready for you, but obviously not. Right, let's go and look at some of the claims here. So this is Olenivka area. Surat Map says the Russian army has managed to capture approximately half of the locality of Olenivka, after taking most of the warehouses and the House of Culture. In addition, troops advanced from the south and southern streets, reaching the school where clashes with the Ukrainian army are taking place. So this is Olenivka. You've got the river area just behind it, and I imagine the Russians are going to be made to fight to take much of this area. It will be an operation withdrawal of the Ukrainians. They'll be fighting their way backwards, but trying to exact as high a cost on the Russians as possible. So that's Olenivka, and then Surat Maps sort of does a wider look at the area. So with the entry of the Russian army into the towns of Berditsy, Olenivka and Tonyenka, the chances of the Ukrainian army being able to hold the first line of defence are practically nil. I don't know that that's anything they want to do. Again, it's moving back to that river. The surprising speed of the Russian army's advance into this territory was due to the rotation of troops that took place during the capture of Avdiivka, where troops from the rear, supposedly tasked with combing the town, began to advance as soon as the previous battle was over. With the capture of the 3 locations mentioned at the beginning, Russian forces will cross the valley and attack the defences at Semenivka. After their capture, Russian troops advanced to the rear of the front line, taking the town of Umanska. The fall of Umanska will open up the possibility of advancing west of Severny. It will be a complicated advance given the open field and the exposure of the troops, something that happens in Novelska, but it will allow Russians to resolve the stalemate in the Pervomaisky axis and move the fighting to the neighbouring Netalovy. On the other hand, Russian army will begin its advance to the north, where it will meet the second line of Ukrainian defence, much more consistent and consisting of a series of fortifications from Kharkivka and the Kharkivka Reservoir, part of the Vovcha River, and then the axis of Novoselivska, Pasha, Novoprokhovska, Solovyove, and Novobakhmutivka until it reaches the stronghold of Ocheretny, from where it continues further north through Keremik and Kalnyove. In this situation, the Russian advance would be halted here and positional battles would return. It is then that the fighting will focus on the upper reaches of the railway and Ocheretny, as well as those adjacent to Novokalnyove. It seems that this will coincide with the intensification of offensive operations on the Bakhmut axis and west of Donetsk city. I mean, goodness me, he seems to know quite a lot about what the Russians are doing. So let's put that all into context. So this is the idea of moving along here. Umansk, which sits on that river, on that bluff, remember. So if I try and draw that, I don't know if I can get close enough. Basically, the Russians are going to be moving along here, Netalyove. They want to take this area and go towards the reservoir at Kharkivka. But Novelska, as mentioned before, is a key place where the Ukrainians are well dug in. They have some pretty good line of sight of the Russians, and that's why the Russians have been unable to advance easily there. And that's helped keep the Russians at bay at Pervomaisky. But if they completely take this area to the north, then that invalidates Novelsky's use there somewhat. And then, Umansky, and the idea is that they take all that area of the lower ground, or at least, until you meet the river. And then the talk is Novobakhmutivka, Novokalnyove, and up to Ocheretny there, or however you pronounce it. I keep pronouncing it differently. And that's that kind of northern way into behind the river. So, Surat Maps is pretty much on the money as far as probably what the Russians will be intending, and that the idea is that somehow links in with a larger move in Bakhmut, but I think that's really stretching things to think that you're going to be able to do all of that when you've got Konstantinivka, Chasiv, New York, Toretsk, Sumy, and these other places that I think will be somewhat more challenging. But that's what their interpretation is. Moving on, we're going to go to Krasnohorivka, where things are not looking very good. So Krasnohorivka is north of Marinka, between Pervomaisky, or the south of Avdiivka area, and Marinka. We're going to have a look at a little bit at what Andrew Perpetua has to say about this, but it is difficult here. There's arguably fighting within Krasnohorivka now. Remember, there was this mine that there was lots of swapped hands a number of times. Anyway, the Russians recently pushed into that, took control of it, and then have pushed past it and up into the very edge, at least, of Krasnohorivka. Let's find the point in Andrew's video. So he's going to start by talking about how the Russians are going to want to get to Kurakhove here as their main goal through Marinka, through Herivka, but they've had a really difficult time taking Herivka by all accounts, and the Ukrainians have done a good job of halting them there. But part of that's going to be taking Krasnohorivka here. So that's where we're talking about. You've got this big dammed reservoir there, and Kurakhove in that position. So let's go to Andrew.
I think they want to get to Kurakhove as soon as possible and capture the city, and keep going. I think that is Russia's really their main goal here. They've gotten Marinka. They tried capturing Herivka, and that failed miserably. They've now been assaulting Krasnohorivka. You can see on my map I have labeled the southern portion of this city as a gray area. This gray area might not be large enough. It's possible that they've taken parts of this railway. It's possible that they control the southern straits of this residential area. And I have heard rumors that Ukraine is withdrawing up to the railway, if not all the way up to this factory. So they may be giving up the southern portion of Krasnohorivka. Russia is also attacking from the east, from Staromykolivka. So putting pressure on the outskirts of Krasnohorivka. Now these outskirts are pretty well defended. There's a lot of good fortifications there, but the southern portion not so much. So yeah, I think this kind of southern area is more where Russia is going to be throwing more and more men into, and we could see a lot of pretty big changes here. I think I'm actually surprised they haven't launched a main attack yet. They may be waiting to break the southern defense of Krasnohorivka before they launch a significant attack. I'm not sure.
So, watch out for this area. I mean, you could argue that, as far as where they're at the moment around Avdiivka, it's not worth too much effort going further to the west as much as it is down here. I mean, if they can get along this road to Kurakhove and then further, I think this would give them more significant advantage than taking the same sort of amount of land up there, because it also completely it causes huge problems for the Ukrainians around Novomykhailivka and down by Vuhledar. Essentially, you would lose all that ground as well. So I think this might be the area where the Russians will be focusing going forward. And again, when the Russians get given 3 million shells by the North Koreans and no one seems to do anything about it, and then when they've received nothing really from the Americans for 5 months, and Europe is flapping around at the moment trying to fill in the gaps, but the Ukrainians are just absolutely desperate for stuff. They do not have it. Is coming in, what they do have comes in dribs and drabs and gets used. And they are doing a good job of attriting the Russians still. But my goodness, imagine how they would be if they were stacked with ammunition and equipment. It's such a shame. Right, we're going to go to the southern Zaporizhzhia front line here, and you can see that Ukrainians have made minor gains, or it's a readjustment, don't know, north of Pryutne, somewhere we haven't mentioned too often recently, in the Velika Novosilka area near Staromilsky. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. And then where's this? This is Marfapil, which we'll come and have a look at in a minute. I think that's over here. Yeah. So good news for the Ukrainians there. And then there's some Russian gains in the Marfapil area towards Halaipale. And here we have the Surat map saying Russian armies restarted the front of Halaipale for the first time since summer 2023, taking control over a big part of the Halaipale dachas there in the Marfapil region. So yeah, just those dachas around there. That's according to Surat maps, and that will be a worry. Of course, it's quite a lot of attention, Halaipale, from artillery, historically speaking. It's a very close to the front line, and it's pretty. It's a bit like Kurakhove, gets a lot of artillery seeing to it. Right. Then we have the Russians making some gains in the Verbove area, trying to close that last remaining gap that the Ukrainians have along the tank ditches here and the Dragon's Teeth. So the Surovikin line, the Ukrainians, that's where they had the most success around the Surovikin line. Now they're being pushed out of there. Surat map says in the last 2 days, Russian army took control over new sections of the Surovikin line and adjacent plantations northwest of Verbove. Ukrainian army is still in control over a small section of the Russian defense line there. However, the Ukrainians are still pushing. I think, well, not pushing. They are attacking in places like Robotyne around there. I think they've attacked back recently, and so they are holding on to this area. But as I've said before, I'm not really sure of the value of holding, expending too much in terms of, Robotyne. But nonetheless, that is what's happening there. Then we come to Kinky. There's a few things to notice about Kinky. One, that the Russians seem to be moving in the eastern areas and moving through and taking control of areas off the Ukrainians. But Andrew Perpetuous talks about how the Ukrainians are then having some success in the western areas. So it's almost like the Ukrainian control of Kinky is just shifting in this southwesterly direction, which is quite bizarre. Here, military says the Kiev Independent says the military is reporting in the area that the Russians are using human wave attacks near Kinky again. Kherson's being hit quite a lot, as always, as are many of the towns along the right bank of the Dnipro River. Remember, we talk about left and right banks in terms of the direction of the water flow, and we do that, just to remind you, I know I've said this I did a whole video on this before, but when you have a meandering river, if you talk about north bank, south bank, west bank, you use those compass points, those cardinal directions, you are going to become unstuck, because actually that bank changes so much. The northern bank, this side of the river here, that's north, but actually that's the other side of the river when you're here, and east and west, and it's all very confusing. So you talk about the direction of the river flow and left and right bank. Now sometimes that seems counterintuitive, because Dnipro is flowing north to south, and the left bank is actually on the right hand side of the map as the north points, compass points north. So the left bank is actually on the right hand side of the river as we are looking at it generally in this area of the map. Right, anyway, going over old ground there, but Kinky, Andrew Perpetua talked about this, saying that, and I've been saying that Kinky has been serving a purpose. The calculation is in favour of the Ukrainians big time, and that's why they're there. I was called out by Radika Pereira, and on my thread, saying there's no evidence that's being used like that. If you think that the Ukrainians genuinely, having pulled out 3/4 of their brigade, are genuinely thinking that they are going to expand that bridgehead in a really massive way to take all this land off the Russians at the point they are at the moment, you've got another thing coming. So in my opinion, the Ukrainians know fully well what they're doing in the upper reaches of their military management, and they are holding that because it is being very, very costly for the Russians. And let's just listen to what Andrew says about that.
In the river, I guess. Now, Kinky is not super important in any sort of like tactical sense. They've done so much damage to Russia. It's incredible, the amount of vehicles they've destroyed, and the amount of damage that they've done to Russian brigades. Ukraine could use like another 40 Krinkys. Do you think you could find like another 40 Krinkys?
He talks to Konstantin, but Konstantin gets cut off there. But the idea is that if they could have 40 Krinkys, the calculation, just be super impressive.
Do you think Ukraine could find like another 40 Krinkys or so? I keep getting disconnected from you.
Asking the questions to do you think if Ukraine can get another bridgehead like in Kinky?
Well, not necessarily a bridgehead, but just like a battle. It's so successful. That's what I mean. It's like they've done so much damage.
But we need to land and hold. So.
And they go on to talk about that, but it is ostensibly visually confirmed that Ukraine has absolutely hammered Russian equipment in the area and has lost very little equipment themselves because they're only across the river with infantry, right? So they've lost some boats, and a couple of bits of equipment they tried to get across. But other than that, they've basically only used troops there. And so the troops are attracting, fixing, and attriting, or the troops aren't doing the attriting. It's the drone operators and occasionally, MLRS and artillery, but mainly drone operators taking a couple of hundred pieces of equipment out there, and the Ukrainians have lost hardly any equipment. It has just been insanely advantageous for the Ukrainians. However, that's not cool for the troops there who are getting attrited and losing their lives and wondering why they are losing their lives in a pointless suicide mission. But if you're looking from a commander's point of view, it's not a suicide mission, or it may be that those people are sacrificed and it appears to them as suicidal, but they are sadly being used to attrit the Russian forces in the area, and it has worked. As Andrew says, it's been insanely successful here. You might not like to hear that if you are a family member of someone who has died there, but that's the nature of war. And these guys are successfully bringing attention to all the Russian forces in the area, and the Russian forces in the area are being hammered, particularly by drone operators that are doing a very good job in that area. So, there you go. That is my opinion of Kinky. That is good to hear that Andrew agrees that is a rationale there. That's a front line, not too much else to mention. A few bits and pieces I'd love to share with you of new news bits I'm finding throughout the day, but you have to wait for the news videos tomorrow. Take care, and I'll speak to you indeed then. Toodle pips.